Hey everyone! Tonight, we're going to drift back about 700 years to a time when books were rare treasures and the written word was preserved only through the patient, tireless work of scribes. We're going to spend a day, a very long, very quiet day, in the life of a medieval scribe. There won't be any grand adventures here, no battles or intrigue. Just the gentle scratch of quill on parchment, the smell of ink, the ache of tired fingers, and the slow, methodical work that filled every hour of a scribe's existence. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's step into the hushed world of the scriptorium. Our scribe's name is Brother Thomas. He's been a monk at this small Benedictine monastery in the English countryside for nearly 15 years now. It's the year 1320, and autumn has settled over the monastery grounds with its characteristic chill. The morning begins long before the sun rises. In the dormitory, a long, narrow room with rows of simple wooden beds, Thomas stirs when the bell rings for matins. It's still completely dark outside. The air is cold enough that he can see his breath in the faint light of the single candle that one of the monks has lit. He sits up slowly on his straw mattress. The blanket that covered him is rough wool, scratchy against his skin. His habit, the long dark robe that he wears every day, hangs on a peg beside his bed. In the darkness, he reaches for it and pulls it over his head. The fabric is cold. Everything is cold in the autumn mornings. The monastery has thick stone walls, which are wonderful for keeping out the summer heat, but make the building feel like a tomb in winter. Thomas wraps his scapula, a sort of apron that goes over his habit, around himself, and finds his soft leather shoes. Around him, the other monks are doing the same. No one speaks. The rule of Saint Benedict, which governs their lives, encourages silence, especially at night. Only the rustle of fabric and the soft footfalls of tired men break the quiet. They make their way down the night stairs, a special staircase that connects the dormitory directly to the church. The steps are worn smooth by centuries of monks making this same journey. Thomas's hand trails along the cold stone wall as he descends. In the church, the monks gather in the choir stalls and the service of matins begins. They chant the psalms in Latin, their voices rising and falling in the ancient melodies. The sound echoes in the dark church. Through the windows, high up in the walls, Thomas can see nothing but blackness. Matins lasts about an hour. When it ends, the monks don't return to bed. Instead, there's a brief period of private prayer, and then it's time for Lauds, the second service of the day. This one welcomes the dawn, though at this time of year, the sun is still nowhere to be seen when Lauds ends. Finally, with 2 services complete, and the sky just beginning to lighten to a deep grey, the monks make their way to the chapter house for a reading, and then to the refectory for breakfast. Breakfast is simple. There's bread, dark, dense bread made from rye and barley. There's weak ale to drink. Sometimes there's porridge made from oats. The monks eat in silence, while one of their number reads aloud from a religious text. The scrape of wooden spoons against wooden bowls, the turning of pages, the reader's voice. These are the only sounds. Thomas eats slowly. He's thinking about the work ahead of him today. Yesterday, he finished copying a Gospel of Luke. Today, he'll begin a new text, a portion of St. Augustine's City of God. It's a challenging text, after dense with theological argument, as the monastery begins its daily need to concentrate carefully. Thomas makes his way to the scriptorium. This is his world, the place where he spends most of his waking hours. The scriptorium is a long room on the south side of the monastery, positioned to catch the best light. It has large windows, a luxury in medieval architecture, because light is essential for the work done here. Even so, on a cloudy autumn morning like this one, the light is thin and grey. The room is cold. There's no fireplace in the scriptorium. Fire is too dangerous around the precious manuscripts and parchments. The monks who work here simply have to endure the cold. In the depths of the winter, Thomas knows, scribes have been known to lose feeling in their fingers while they work. There are 6 desks in the scriptorium, though not all are always occupied. Each desk is a slanted writing surface, positioned to catch the light from the windows. Beside each desk is a small stool. There are shelves along the walls holding books. The exemplars, the texts that the scribes are copying from. Thomas goes to his desk, the one nearest the largest window. Over the years, this has become his customary spot. He knows every knot in the wood, every slight unevenness in the surface. On the desk is a leather case containing his tools. He opens it carefully. Inside are his quills, 3 of them, each cut from the flight feather of a goose. There's his knife, used for sharpening the quills and for scraping away mistakes. There's a pumice stone for smoothing the parchment. There's a small straight edge, a pricking tool for marking lines, and a compass for drawing circular decorations. Next to the case is his inkhorn, a small container made from, as the name suggests, the horn of a cow. It holds his black ink. He has another small pot for red ink, which he'll use for headings and important passages. Thomas sits on his stool and takes a moment to prepare his workspace. First, he retrieves the exemplar he'll be copying from, the monastery's copy of Augustine's text. It's a thick book, beautifully made, copied perhaps 50 years ago. The pages are stiff parchment, the writing clear and regular. He sets it on a small lectern to the side of his desk, positioning it so he can see it easily while he works. Then he takes out a fresh sheet of parchment from the cupboard. The parchment itself is a marvel. It's made from animal skin, usually calf, sheep, or goat. The skins have been soaked in lime to remove the hair by stretched on frames, scraped thin, and treated until they're smooth and white. Each sheet represents hours of work by craftspeople who specialize in parchment making. Thomas examines his sheet carefully. He's looking for any rough spots, any remaining hair follicles or thin patches. The parchment is good quality, smooth and even. He rubs it gently with the pumice stone anyway, just to ensure the surface will take ink perfectly. Now comes the ruling. Before he can write a single word, Thomas must prepare the page with guidelines. Medieval manuscripts don't have printed lines like modern notebooks. Each page must be ruled by hand. He takes his pricking tool, a sharp metal point, and makes tiny holes along the edges of the parchment. These marks will guide his lines. Then, using a thin lead point and his straight edge, he draws horizontal lines across the page from mark to mark. The lines are faint, just barely visible, but they'll keep his writing straight and even. He also rules vertical lines to create margins. Medieval pages are carefully designed with generous margins on all sides. The writing will fill only the central portion of the page. This preparation takes time. The light has grown a little stronger by the time Thomas finishes ruling his first sheet. In the corner of the scriptorium, he can hear Brother William sharpening a quill. The scrape of the knife against the quill's shaft is a familiar sound. Finally, Thomas is ready to write. He takes one of his quills and examines it. The tip needs trimming. Using his knife, he makes a careful cut to create a fine, even nib. He tests it on a scrap of parchment, making a few practice strokes. The line is too thick. He trims it again, very slightly. Another test. Better. He dips the quill in his inkhorn. The ink is thick and black, made from oak galls, iron sulfate, and gum arabic. It has a slightly astringent smell. A drop of it could stain permanently, so Thomas is careful as he lifts the quill, letting the excess ink drip back into the horn. He positions the quill over the parchment. He reads the first line in the exemplar, De civitate Dei contra paganos, liber. The city of God against the pagans, book. And then he begins to write. His hand moves across the page in the careful, controlled movements he's practiced for 15 years. Each letter is formed with precision. The script, Gothic textura, the formal bookhand used for important religious texts. The letters are narrow and angular, packed tightly together. Thomas writes slowly. This isn't like writing a quick note or jotting down thoughts. This is copying, word for word, precious text. Every letter must be correct. Every word must match the exemplar exactly. One mistake, and he'll have to scrape it away with his knife, which mars the parchment. His concentration is complete. He reads a few words from the exemplar, holds them in his mind, then reproduces them on his page. Read, remember, write. Read, remember, write. The rhythm becomes meditative. The quill needs to be re-dipped in ink every few words. Each time, Thomas pauses, dips, waits for the excess to drip, then continues. The level of ink in his inkhorn is slowly dropping. Around him, the other scribes in the scriptorium are engaged in similar work. Brother William is copying a psalter. Brother John is working on a charter, a legal document for a local landowner. The scriptorium isn't only for religious texts. It also provides the writing services that the monastery's patrons need. The silence is almost complete, broken only by the scratch of quills, the occasional rustle of parchment, the soft sound of a page turning in an exemplar. Thomas's hand begins to ache after a while. The constant pressure of gripping the quill, the repetitive motion of forming letters, it's taxing work. He pauses, flexes his fingers, then continues. He reaches the end of his first line. It has taken him perhaps 10 minutes to write 30-some words. At this rate, he'll complete maybe half a page before the next service. The bell rings for terce, the third of the daily services. Thomas sets down his quill carefully, never leaving it in the ink, which could damage the nib, and wipes his hands on a cloth. A small smudge of ink has somehow gotten on his left thumb. It will be there for days. Ink stains are a scribe's constant companion. He walks with the other monks to the church. His back is a little stiff from sitting hunched over his desk. The church feels even colder after the relative warmth of the scriptorium. Terce is shorter than the night services, perhaps 30 minutes of prayers and psalms. When it ends, the monks return to their various duties. Thomas goes back to the scriptorium. He looks at what he's written. 4 lines. The text is neat and even, but 4 lines seem like so little for all that effort. He knows that at this pace, it will take him months to complete the entire book he's copying. But there's no rushing this work. Speed leads to errors. And errors in copying sacred texts are not merely inconvenient. They're a kind of sin, a failure in the scribe's sacred duty to preserve the words accurately. Thomas picks up his quill and continues. Read, remember, write, dip, wait, write. The morning wears on. The light from the window shifts as the sun, hidden behind clouds, moves across the sky. His hand cramps. He pauses, shakes it out, massages the base of his thumb where a callus has formed over the years. The callus is the mark of a scribe, earned through countless hours of gripping a quill. The cold is making his fingers stiff. In a few weeks, when winter truly sets in, this will be much worse. He's heard stories of scribes in northern monasteries who could barely hold their quills by midwinter, who had to stop frequently to warm their hands. Thomas has developed a technique for dealing with the cold. Every so often he tucks his left hand, the one not holding the quill, inside his habit against his body. The little bit of warmth helps. He makes a mistake. His attention wandered for just a moment, and he's written sanctum when it should be sanctum, a different form of the word holy. The error seems small, but it's incorrect. He reaches for his knife and begins carefully scraping away the letter. The parchment is strong. It can withstand this treatment, though the surface becomes slightly more rough. He'll have to smooth it with pumice again before writing over it. The correction takes several minutes. When he's satisfied, he writes the word correctly. The patch is visible if you look closely, but it's acceptable work. By the time the bell rings for sext, the midday service, Thomas has completed about half a page, perhaps 15 lines of text. He looks at it with a mixture of satisfaction and weariness. Good work, but so slow. Sext is followed by the main meal of the day. In the refectory, the monks gather for dinner. It's the most substantial meal they'll have, though substantial is relative. Today there's bean pottage, thick with vegetables from the monastery garden, carrots, onions, leeks. There's more of that dark bread and a piece of cheese for each monk. There's ale to drink. The reader today is Brother Peter, who reads from the life of Saint Benedict. His voice is steady and clear, and Thomas finds himself half listening while he eats. He's thinking about the afternoon's work. He's at a difficult passage in the Augustine text, one with complex theological vocabulary. After the meal, there's a brief period of rest. Some monks go to the cloister to walk and stretch. Thomas goes outside for a few minutes. The air is crisp and damp. The monastery grounds are quiet. In the distance, he can see the lay brothers working in the fields, preparing them for winter. The sky is still overcast. Thomas worries about the afternoon light. On days like this, when thick clouds block the sun, the scriptorium can become too dim to work by mid-afternoon. He'll have to make the most of what light remains. He doesn't rest long. After perhaps 20 minutes, he's back in the scriptorium, back at his desk, back to his quill and parchment. The afternoon is the most challenging part of the day for scribes. The initial freshness of morning is gone. The hand is already tired. And the light, always the light, is beginning to fail. Thomas works steadily, but he can feel his concentration wavering. The words of Augustine are dense, full of abstract concepts and complex sentences. He has to read each passage several times to understand it before he can copy it accurately. Around him, the scriptorium is quiet. Brother William appears to be struggling as well. Thomas can hear him sighing occasionally, the sound of someone fighting fatigue. The light from the windows is definitely dimmer now. Thomas finds himself squinting slightly as he works. He knows that in another hour or two, he'll have to stop. It will be too dark to continue safely. Mistakes multiply when scribes work in poor light. His back aches from the constant hunching over his desk. His right hand, his writing hand, is cramping regularly now. The base of his neck is tight and sore. But he continues. Read, remember, write. The familiar rhythm, the scratch of quill on parchment, the smell of ink. This is his life, and has been for 15 years. This is how books are made, how knowledge is preserved, how the words of the church fathers are passed down through the generations. Sometimes, Thomas thinks about the reader who will eventually hold this book he's creating. Will it be a scholar, another monk? Will they appreciate the hours of work that went into each page? Will they notice his careful letter forms, the evenness of his lines? Probably not. The nature of his work is to be invisible. A good scribe's hand doesn't call attention to itself. The reader should be able to focus entirely on the words, not on the writing. The bell rings for none, the service of the 9th hour. Thomas is relieved. His eyes are tired, and the light really is quite poor now. He's completed perhaps 3/4 of a page since midday. Not as much as he'd hoped, but acceptable. After none, he returns to the scriptorium for one final hour of work. This is the hardest hour. The daylight is fading. His hand is very tired, but there are still a few more lines he can manage. He lights a candle, something he resists doing until absolutely necessary because of the fire risk, and positions it carefully to supplement the fading daylight. The warm candlelight flickers, casting moving shadows. It's not ideal for detailed work, but it will do for a little while longer. He manages 4 more lines before the light becomes simply too dim. Any more would risk mistakes. He sets down his quill for the last time today, wipes it clean, and carefully puts away his tools. The bell for Vespers rings as Thomas is finishing his cleanup. He's completed about a full page today, perhaps 60 lines of text. In a printed book, that might be 2 or 3 pages. By modern standards, it seems like almost nothing. But by medieval standards, it's a solid day's work. Vespers is followed by a light supper, just bread and ale, sometimes a bit of fruit if it's available. Then there's a brief period of recreation, when the monks are allowed to talk quietly among themselves. Thomas usually spends this time in the cloister, walking slowly and speaking with the other monks about small matters, the weather, the progress of work in the fields, the health of the elderly brothers. Tonight, he talks briefly with Brother William about their work. William is struggling with his psalter. The exemplar he's copying from has some unclear passages, and he's not sure how to interpret them. They discuss it for a few minutes, but neither has a definitive answer. It will have to wait for the next day, when they can consult with the prior. As the last light fades from the sky, the bell rings for compline, the final service of the day. In the dark church, the monks sing the psalms one last time. There's something particularly peaceful about Compline, the sense of the day drawing to a close, of rest approaching. After Compline, the monks observe the great silence. No talking is allowed from now until after morning mass. They return to the dormitory, change into their night clothes, simple linen shifts, and lie down on their hard beds. Thomas is exhausted. His hand still aches. Tomorrow, he'll wake before dawn and do it all again. And the day after that, and the day after that. As he drifts towards sleep, his last conscious thoughts are of the page he completed today. One page. In months of work, those pages will add up to a complete book. And that book will last for centuries, preserving the words of Saint Augustine for generations yet unborn. This is the work. This is the life. Silent, slow, painstaking. Not glamorous, not exciting. Just the steady, faithful labor of preserving knowledge, one careful letter at a time. Let's step back now from Brother Thomas's specific day and think more broadly about what it meant to be a scribe in medieval Europe. Scribes were essential to medieval society. In a world where printing didn't exist, every single book had to be copied by hand. Every Bible, every prayer book, every work of philosophy or history or literature, all of it existed only in handwritten copies. Most scribes, like Brother Thomas, were monks. The monasteries were the centers of learning and literacy in medieval Europe. It was in the scriptoriums that the knowledge of the ancient world was preserved through the Dark Ages and into the later medieval period. But not all scribes were monks. By the later Middle Ages, especially in cities, there were professional scribes who worked for pay. These secular scribes might copy documents for lawyers, create prayer books for wealthy patrons, or produce the increasingly popular vernacular literature, stories and poems in French, English, Italian, rather than Latin. The training to become a scribe was long and rigorous. A novice scribe might spend years learning just to form letters properly. The various scripts, Carolingian minuscule, Gothic textura, Gothic cursive, and others, each had their own rules and standards. A scribe had to master them all. And it wasn't just about pretty handwriting. Scribes needed to know Latin, often Greek as well. They needed to understand what they were copying, especially when dealing with complex theological or philosophical texts. A misunderstood word could become a copying error that would be perpetuated in every copy made from that copy. Scribes also needed to know about abbreviation. To save space and time, medieval texts are full of abbreviated words. Common words like et and might be represented by a special symbol. Endings of words might be indicated by marks above the letters. A scribe had to know all these conventions and use them consistently. Let's talk about the materials that scribes like Thomas worked with every day. Parchment, first of all, was expensive and precious. Making it was a complex process. After an animal was slaughtered for meat, its skin could be sold to parchment makers. They would soak the skin in lime for days to loosen the hair. Then the hair was scraped off, a messy, smelly job. The skin was then stretched on a wooden frame and scraped again, while still wet, to make it thinner and more uniform. As it dried under tension, it became stiff and flat. Further scraping and treatments with chalk or pumice created the smooth white surface suitable for writing. The best parchment was called vellum, made from calf skin. It was finer and smoother than parchment made from sheep or goat. The most precious manuscripts were written on vellum. A single sheet of parchment might represent several days' wages for a laborer. A book the size of a Bible could require the skins of hundreds of animals. This is why books were so valuable in the Middle Ages. The materials alone represented enormous wealth. Ink was another crucial material. The standard black ink was made from oak galls, those odd round growths you sometimes see on oak trees. They're caused by wasp larvae, and they're rich in tannic acid. The galls were crushed and mixed with iron sulfate and gum arabic. When the mixture was exposed to air, a chemical reaction created an intense black color. This iron gall ink was wonderfully permanent. It actually etched slightly into the parchment, bonding chemically with the material. That's why medieval manuscripts, even ones that are 1,000 years old, still have crisp, dark text. Red ink was used for headings, initial letters, and important passages. It was usually made from cinnabar or mercury sulfide, or from red lead. These minerals were ground into fine powder and mixed with a binding medium. Other colors were available for more elaborate manuscripts. Blue might come from lapis lazuli, imported at great expense from Afghanistan. Green might come from verdigris, made by exposing copper to acid. Gold leaf was used in the most precious manuscripts. The quills that scribes used were always bird feathers, usually goose, sometimes swan for the very finest work. The flight feathers from the wings were best. They were strong and had a good curve. Interestingly, feathers from the left wing were preferred by right-handed scribes because of the natural curve. Preparing a quill for writing was an art in itself. The feather had to be hardened by being heated in hot sand or ashes. The shaft was then cut to a comfortable length, and the end was carefully shaped with a knife to create the nib. The nib needed to be cut at just the right angle, with a small slit up the center to help control ink flow. A quill would last for perhaps a week of steady use before it needed to be replaced. A scribe like Thomas might go through 50 or more quills in a year. Scriptoriums were governed by strict rules. Silence was usually enforced, following the monastic rule of quiet contemplation. If scribes needed to communicate, they used a system of hand signals. The monks had signs for common requests. I need more parchment. Where is the exemplar? I need the prior. These signs allowed the work to continue without disturbing the contemplative silence. Eating and drinking were forbidden in the scriptorium. The risk to the manuscripts was too great. Even a drop of ale on a page could ruin hours of work. Similarly, fire was treated with extreme caution. Candles were used only when absolutely necessary, and they were watched carefully. An entire monastery's collection of books could be destroyed by a single fire. And it happened more than once in medieval history. The exemplars, the books being copied from, were treated with special reverence. They were often chained to their lecterns to prevent theft. A monastery's collection of books was one of its most valuable possessions. Scribes were expected to maintain their tools in perfect condition. A knife had to be sharp enough to trim a quill or scrape away an error with precision. Rulers and compasses had to be accurate. The quality of the work depended on the quality of the tools. Being a scribe was physically demanding work. The constant sitting, the repetitive hand motions, the eye strain, all of these took their toll. Medieval scribes often suffered from what we'd now call repetitive strain injuries. Their hands would cramp and ache. In the margins of manuscripts, you can sometimes find scribes' complaints written in tiny letters. "Thank God, it will soon be dark." Or, "Oh, my hand." Or, "Writing is excessive drudgery. It crooks your back, it dims your sight, it twists your stomach and your sides." The cold was another constant challenge. Scriptoriums had large windows for light, but this also meant they were drafty. In winter, scribes worked with numb fingers. Some manuscripts contain scribes' prayers for warmer weather. Despite the difficulties, there were rewards. Scribes took pride in their work. In some manuscripts, you can find scribes' signatures or personal notes. "Hugo wrote this," or "Pray for the scribe." It was a way of making a mark, of achieving a kind of immortality. There was also the satisfaction of preserving important texts. Scribes knew they were doing sacred work, keeping the words of the Bible and the Church Fathers alive for future generations. For a monk like Brother Thomas, this wasn't just a job. It was a form of prayer, a way of serving God. And occasionally there was beauty. When a scribe worked on an illuminated manuscript, one with decorated letters and painted illustrations, the work became artistic as well as functional. Those magnificent illustrated Bibles and books of hours are among the glories of medieval art. It's important to remember that for a monk like Brother Thomas, scribal work was only one part of his day. He also had to attend all the monastic services, 8 of them throughout each day and night. This is called the divine office, the set cycle of prayers and psalms that structured monastic life. Matins and lauds before dawn, prime at the first hour, terce at the 3rd hour, sext at midday, none at the 9th hour, vespers in the evening, compline at night. Together, these services took up perhaps 4 or 5 hours of each day. Then there were meals, eaten in common in the refectory, and chapter meetings, where the monks gathered to discuss monastery business and manual labor. Even scribes were expected to spend some time each day in physical work, tending the garden or helping with other tasks. Sundays and feast days meant different schedules, with longer services and no work in the scriptorium. For a monk, life was completely structured by the rule. Individual choice was minimal. You woke when the bell told you to wake, ate when it was time to eat, worked when it was time to work, prayed when it was time to pray. This might sound oppressive to modern ears, but for many medieval people, it represented a different kind of freedom. Freedom from worry about what to do. Freedom to focus entirely on spiritual life and work. Over the centuries, scribal hands evolved and changed. Brother Thomas, working in the early 14th century, would have used a Gothic script. Probably Gothic textura for his formal work on the Augustan manuscript. Gothic script developed in the 12th century and became the standard bookhand across Europe for the next 300 years. It's characterized by narrow angular letters, thick vertical strokes, and minimal curves. It's dense and somewhat difficult to read, but it was space efficient, important when parchment was expensive. But Gothic wasn't the only script. For less formal work, personal letters, quick notes, documents, scribes used cursive scripts that were faster to write. These cursive hands were less beautiful, but more practical. Earlier, in the Carolingian period, around 800 to 900 AD, scribes had used the Carolingian minuscule, a rounder, more open script. This script was highly legible and elegant. The Carolingian Renaissance, sponsored by Charlemagne, standardized this script across his empire. Before that, in the early medieval period, various national hands predominated. Insular script in Ireland and Britain, Visigothic in Spain, Merovingian in France. Each region had its own traditions. Later, in the Renaissance, humanist scholars would revive Carolingian minuscule, mistakenly thinking it was the script of ancient Rome. This humanist minuscule would eventually evolve into the italic hand and, later still, would influence the development of printed typefaces. But in Brother Thomas's time, Gothic ruled. Its angular, compressed letters filled page after page of the manuscripts produced in medieval scriptoriums. No matter how careful a scribe was, errors crept in. A moment's distraction, a misreading of the exemplar, simple fatigue. All could lead to mistakes. Some errors were small, a misspelled word, a letter written twice by accident. These could be corrected by scraping away the error with a knife and writing the correction. Other errors were more serious. A scribe might skip an entire line, his eye jumping from one line to the next. Or he might copy the same line twice. In some cases, errors went undetected until the manuscript was complete. Then the corrections had to be made in the margins, with marks showing where the correction should be inserted. Some manuscripts show multiple layers of correction. A later scribe, noticing errors in an older manuscript, might correct them. Then another scribe, copying from that manuscript, might disagree with the corrections and change them back. This is why modern scholars have to be so careful when working with medieval texts. Every manuscript is potentially different from every other manuscript. Errors accumulate and propagate through the copying process. This was especially problematic for biblical texts, where accuracy was crucial. By the late Middle Ages, there were concerns about the proliferation of variant readings in Bible manuscripts. This was one factor that would later make the printing press so revolutionary. Printed editions could ensure that every copy was identical. Let's return to Brother Thomas as evening settles over the monastery. After Compline, lying in his narrow bed in the dormitory, he has a few moments for personal reflection before sleep claims him. He thinks about the page he completed today. One page of Augustine's great work on the city of God. One page that will become part of a book that might last for centuries. He thinks about his hands, aching from the day's work. He flexes his fingers in the darkness, feeling the familiar stiffness in the joints. He wonders, not for the first time, about the readers who will someday use the book he's creating. Will it stay here in this monastery to be read by generations of monks? Or will it be sent somewhere else? To another monastery or to the library of a bishop? Will those future readers understand how much work went into each page? Will they appreciate the hours of concentration, the physical discomfort, the dedication required? Probably not, he thinks. And in a way, that's as it should be. His work is meant to be invisible. The words are what matter, not the scribe who copied them. He's serving God, after all, not seeking personal glory. The work itself is the prayer. Tomorrow will bring another day much like this one. And the day after that. And so on, until the book is complete. Then there will be another book to copy. and another after that. This is his life. Has been for 15 years. Will be until he's too old to work or until God calls him home. It's not a life everyone would choose. It's quiet, repetitive, demanding. But for Brother Thomas it's enough, more than enough. It's a life of purpose, of service, of preserving the precious knowledge of the faith. As he drifts towards sleep, the last thing he hears is the breathing of the other monks in the dormitory. The community that surrounds him, that gives structure and meaning to his days. Tomorrow, before dawn, the bell will ring for matins, and it will all begin again. The life of a scribe wasn't exactly the same year-round. The seasons brought different challenges and opportunities. Summer was perhaps the easiest time for scribal work. The days were long, providing many hours of good natural light. The scriptorium was warm, sometimes too warm, but that was better than freezing. The main challenge in summer was staying alert. The drowsy warmth after midday dinner could make concentration difficult. And insects, flies especially, could be maddening. There are marginal notes in some medieval manuscripts complaining about flies. Autumn, like the season when our day with Brother Thomas takes place, was a transitional time. The days grew shorter, the light thinner. Scribes had to work efficiently to make use of the available daylight. Winter was the hardest season. The short days meant limited working hours. And the cold, the terrible, penetrating cold of a medieval monastery, made work genuinely painful. Scribes wrote with numb fingers, huddled in their habits, stealing warmth wherever they could find it. Some monasteries had a warming room, heated by a fire, where monks could go to warm themselves. But these were rare, and time there was limited. The scriptorium itself was never heated. Spring brought renewed hope. The days lengthened. The temperature became bearable. Scribes could work longer hours again, and the work felt less like an ordeal. The church calendar also affected the rhythm of work. Major feast days meant no work in the scriptorium. The whole day was given over to celebration and worship. During Lent, the diet was especially sparse, and scribes felt the effects of the hunger. During Advent, the approaching Christmas celebration brought a sense of anticipation. Let's consider the economic aspect of manuscript production. Books were enormously valuable in the Middle Ages. A single book might cost as much as a farm or a small house. This was partly due to the materials. Parchment was expensive. A large Bible might require 200 or more animal skins. At medieval prices, the parchment alone could cost the equivalent of several years' wages for a laborer. Then there was the labor. If a scribe took a year to copy a book, which wasn't unusual for a large text, that represented an enormous investment of time and skill. For illuminated manuscripts, the cost soared even higher. The pigments for colored inks and paints were expensive, especially blues made from lapis lazuli, or purples from exotic sources. Gold leaf for gilding was, of course, precious, and the work of illumination took specialist skills. Often, the writing and the decoration were done by different people. A scribe like Brother Thomas might copy the text, leaving spaces for decorated initial letters. Then an illuminator would come and fill in those spaces with beautiful painted letters and illustrations. The most luxurious manuscripts, books of hours for wealthy patrons, presentation Bibles for kings, could take multiple artisans years to complete and might cost a fortune. This is why monasteries' libraries were so carefully guarded. A monastery might own only a few dozen books, but those books represented an enormous accumulation of wealth and knowledge. When books were loaned to other monasteries, the arrangements were formal and careful. Often collateral was required, another book, or a valuable object, held until the borrowed book was returned. Theft of books was taken very seriously. Some manuscripts contain curses against potential thieves. Whoever steals this book, may he be cursed and turned into swine, jeta, or similar threats. Brother Thomas is copying a theological work by Augustine. But medieval scribes copied all sorts of texts. Bibles were perhaps the most important. Every monastery needed Bibles, and they wore out over the time from use, requiring new copies. Making a complete Bible was a major undertaking. The text was long, the equivalent of about 800,000 words in modern terms. A single scribe might spend a year or more copying a complete Bible. Often the work was divided among several scribes working simultaneously. Liturgical books were also essential. The Missal, containing the texts for Mass. The Breviary, containing the texts for the Divine Office. The Psalter, the Book of Psalms. These were in constant use and constantly needed to be replaced. Works of theology and philosophy, like the Augustine text Brother Thomas is copying, were important for the monastery's educational mission. The classics of Christian thought needed to be available for study. Then there were chronicles and histories, the monastery's own records, but also broader historical works. Legal documents were another category. Charters recording land grants, privileges, rights, these needed to be copied and preserved. By the later Middle Ages, vernacular literature was becoming more popular. Romances, poetry, tales in French or English or Italian rather than Latin. Professional scribes in cities often specialized in this kind of work: medical texts, herbals, astronomical works. The scope of medieval written knowledge was broader than people sometimes realize. Each type of text had its own requirements. A Bible needed to be accurate and reverent. A legal document needed to be precise and clear. A romance could be more freeform, even experimental. For a monk like Brother Thomas, scribal work wasn't just a job. It was a form of prayer, a contemplative practice. The repetitive nature of the work, the slow formation of each letter, the steady rhythm of read, remember, write, created a meditative state. Brother Thomas could work for hours with his mind quiet, focused only on the immediate task. This was valued in monastic spirituality. Work that occupied the hands but left the mind free for prayer was ideal. While Thomas's fingers formed the letters, his heart could be turned toward God. Some monastic writers spoke of the scriptorium as a place of spiritual combat, where monks fought against the temptations of sloth, pride, and distraction. Maintaining concentration through long hours of demanding work was a discipline, a way of training the will. The content of what he was copying also shaped Brother Thomas spiritually. Spending months copying Augustine's meditations on God, sin, grace, and redemption, these ideas would seep into his consciousness, shaping his own understanding of faith. In this way, the scribe was both transmitting and receiving the text. He was passing it on to future readers, but also absorbing it himself. Medieval spiritual writers sometimes drew parallels between the scribe and the Virgin Mary. Just as Mary received the word of God in her womb, the scribe received the words of Scripture in his mind and heart and brought them forth again in visible form. This might seem like an odd comparison to modern sensibilities, but it shows how seriously medieval people took the work of copying sacred texts. It wasn't mechanical drudgery, it was a holy calling. As we come toward the end of our long day with Brother Thomas, let's think about the larger significance of what we've witnessed. The work of medieval scribes preserved Western civilization. When the Roman Empire fell and the ancient libraries were destroyed or scattered, it was monks like Brother Thomas who kept the texts alive. In their scriptoriums, they copied not only Christian texts, but also the classics of pagan antiquity. Virgil and Ovid, Cicero and Seneca. These authors survived because medieval scribes copied their works, even though they were the products of pre-Christian Rome. Much of what we know about the ancient world comes from medieval manuscript copies. The originals are long gone. What survives are the copies made by scribes working in candlelight in cold stone rooms. Without these scribes, whole swaths of human knowledge and literature would have been lost forever. And they did this work day after day, year after year, for centuries. Anonymous scribes whose names we'll never know, whose lives were spent in quiet rooms making letter after letter. Brother Thomas is fictional, but he represents thousands of real scribes. Their collective labor is one of the great achievements of medieval civilization. When we visit a library today and see a medieval manuscript, we're looking at the product of months or years of one person's dedicated work. Each page is a small miracle of patience and skill. The advent of printing in the 15th century would eventually make the scribe's work obsolete. Books could be produced faster and cheaper through mechanical means. The age of the manuscript was ending. But for 1,000 years, from the fall of Rome to the Renaissance, this was how books were made. One scribe, one quill, one page at a time. As the darkness deepens in the monastery dormitory and Brother Thomas sleeps, we can appreciate anew the quiet heroism of his work. Tomorrow, he'll wake before dawn and begin again. Another page, another day, and somewhere, centuries in the future, someone will hold the book he made and read the words he copied. And the chain of knowledge will continue, unbroken. And so we come to the end of our day in the scriptorium. We've spent time in the quiet world of Brother Thomas, watching him work through a single day of the 1,000 that made up his life as a scribe. It's been a slow journey, deliberately so. There's been no drama, no excitement, just the gentle rhythm of monastic life and the patient labor of copying texts. In our modern world of digital communication, where text can be copied instantly and perfectly, it's hard to imagine a time when every word had to be written by hand, when creating a single book required months of work. But perhaps there's something we can learn from Brother Thomas and his fellow scribes. Something about patience, about dedication to craft, about the value of slow, careful work. In their quiet rooms, with their aching hands and tired eyes, they preserved the past for us. They gave us our heritage. And now, as you drift towards sleep, you can imagine the peaceful silence of the scriptorium, the scratch of quill on parchment, the smell of ink, the cool light from the windows, the world of the medieval scribe, quiet, slow, and infinitely patient. Rest well.